Hi there, welcome to this short session for 30 minutes. Tim Baker is my name, and I'm going to talk about some tactics around improving performance in teams, and particularly looking at continuous improvement. We're all living in a very busy environment, and all of us have got lots on our plates. So finding time to actually work on the team rather than in the team is not an easy thing to do. So what I want to do is share with you a couple of ideas that might help you do that. And I think you might find them very useful. So I'll just share my screen to start with, and we'll launch into the presentation. Okay, so just in case you don't know who I am, I'll just give you a bit of an overview. You can see that I am a keynote speaker. I also run workshops. I'm an executive coach, and I'm also an author. I've written 14 books. One of those books is Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. And I'm going to refer to that book today because that's where this material comes from. And I've got a special offer for you at the end of this presentation. So let's look at a couple of the testimonials around my book. I did a lot of work with the New Zealand All Blacks, and I got a couple of very nice testimonials from a number of players talking about the value of the book in the sporting world and also in the business world as well. And particularly, I got a very nice testimonial from Nick Farr-Jones, who, of course, was the winning captain of the World Cup team, and he talks about my book in terms of nailing the 8 characteristics. All right, so let's launch into the topic that we're going to talk about today. Now, the big objection that people will have about this topic, I'm sure, is how do I find the time to work on the business rather than in the business? And really, all of us have, limited time to our disposal, but we all know that improving the quality of the team, continuous improvement, in other words, is a critically important aspect of teamwork. But of course, we need to find the time to do that. So the question is, how do we find the time to do that? And I want to share with you some ways that you might bridge that gap. So I want to talk about debriefing, and I think debriefing holds the key for us. Now, when we're working on a project, there are opportunities to debrief during the project, and there are opportunities to debrief at the end of the project. And I think in a project-based environment, continuous improvement is a little easier. So I'm going to share with you the after-action review, which the military use extensively. In fact, this was developed in the US military, and the corporate world have taken it on board, but unfortunately, many companies have now looked at it as a box-ticking exercise rather than a genuine attempt to create continuous improvement in our team. So I want to talk about it from the way it should be operating, and then we'll talk about some of the uses of the after-action review. And as I said at the end of the presentation, I've got a special offer for you. So let's launch into looking at the debriefing options. But just before I do that, this is the model from my book, and you can see around the outside, I have identified the 8 characteristics of high-performing teams. And I'll just run through them very briefly. We've got building trust, sharing leadership, being agile, creating purpose, managing stakeholders, improving systems, utilizing diversity, and learning continuously. Now, there may well be other characteristics of high-performing teams, but certainly from my experience in working with many high-performing teams across 21 industries, I'd have to say to you that those 8 are prevalent in any high-performing team. However, what we're going to focus on today is this area here, which is improving systems. So I want to spend a bit of time today talking about that. Of course, there are other presentations where I talk about these other 7 characteristics, but let's just talk about improving systems for the moment. Now, all high-performing teams, whether they're in the sporting world, in the business world, wherever they are, you can be sure that they're always improving the way they do things. whether it's the New Zealand All Blacks who are going through a little difficult patch at the moment, whether it's a corporate team, an executive team, perhaps it might be a project team. All teams that are high performing are always trying to do things better, faster, easier, safer, and so on. And they tend to find the time to do this. So the question is, how do they do it? And how can you, in your team, apply some of the principles of high-performing teams? So what you're seeing here is a little table from my book, and you can see that up the top you've got formative and summative. So these are our opportunities to debrief in a project-based environment. So formative briefings, or debriefings, I should say, are done during the team. So they might happen intermittently throughout a project. And you've got two forms of formative debriefs. You've got regular dialogue, and the regular dialogue is dialogue where you might do that informally. So this might be a corridor conversation. This could be a impromptu get together. Just how's the project traveling? Where are we up to? What's working? What's not working? So that's what we mean by regular dialogue. A more formal formative approach would be a regular check-in. That is a scheduled time where the team gets together and they sit down and they just review their progress, what has to be done in the future, what's been done in the past. So that's a formative opportunity. Now, a summative opportunity is an opportunity to debrief at the end of a project. So at the end of a project, you might have an informal debrief where people will talk about their experience within the team and what's happened throughout the project. And that would be an informal type of debrief. A more formal type of debrief would be where people would actually present a report or their findings based on the project itself. So basically what it means for you is that you've got 4 opportunities to debrief during a project. And those opportunities are perfect opportunities to improve your systems. So the question might be, well, okay, I can see that we've got these 4 opportunities, these 4 windows, but how do we actually go about improving systems? And what do we actually do? And what is the process we might use to do that? And that's what I want to talk about here. So one of the most effective tools, and I think it's highly underrated and poorly used, is the after action review. And Peter Senge had some really positive praise. Now, Peter Senge is a guru of change. He basically said that the after action review is arguably one of the most successful organizational learning methods ever devised. Yet every corporate effort to graft this truly innovative practice into their culture has failed because, again and again, people reduce the living practice of the after-action review to a sterile technique. And unfortunately, that's been my experience as well. So I want to sort of revive this AAR and give you an opportunity to think about the 4 windows that I shared with you earlier and how you can use an after-action review to actually improve systems. How do we do things better, faster, easier, and safer, as I said earlier? So let's have a look at that in a bit more detail. Basically, there are 3 questions that you can ask. And as I said, you've got 4 opportunities. So whether this is a formative or a summative debrief in a project environment, I would strongly suggest as a team leader that you ask these 4 questions, these 3 questions during these 4 opportunities. And if you ask these questions when all the team are present, it's even better because while it's fresh in people's minds, they will have some responses and answers to these 3 questions. So the very first question to ask is, what systems, processes, and procedures are working well? Now, why start there? Now, maybe the project's gone off the rails. Nevertheless, whether the project's gone off the rails or not, there are always things in any project that are actually working extremely well. So let's hear what they are, and the leader should ask that question straight up front, whether it's a whether, as I say, it's a formal or an informal debrief, they can still ask that question. And of course, you wait and you listen and you give people an opportunity to share that. You might even record that information on a whiteboard. It doesn't really matter. The most important thing is you identify the things upfront that are working extremely well or have been working extremely well in the project. Then you move to the second question. And the second question is, what systems, processes, and procedures are not working well? Now, even the very best, most smoothly operated project will always have things that are not working well. There are systems that might be clunky, there might be processes that are not really relevant, and there might be procedures that are outdated. And so this is the opportunity for you and your team to talk about those things and to identify what those areas of improvement are. And so now what we've done in these two questions is we've identified the things that are working well, and we've identified the things that are not working well. Now, the advantage that you've got here by debriefing people, whether it's formal or informal, is that you're doing it at the time. So it's fresh in people's minds. And because it's fresh in people's minds, of course, they're going to be more clued up as to what's working well and what's not working well. The other advantage of doing this in a debriefing environment with your full team involved is that everybody has skin in the game. Everyone has an opportunity to contribute. And I would set a little standard and suggest that everybody should be contributing in these after action reviews. So once you've got through those two questions, and we're probably talking at most 10 minutes to discuss those two questions. The third question is where the rubber meets the road. And this is where some significant improvements can be made and identified. And the question that you ask there is, what improvements or changes can we make for the future? So in other words, if we're doing this project again, what would be some of the things that we could change? What are some of the systems we could improve? What are some of the processes we could perhaps update? What are some of the procedures that we could implement that perhaps would make a difference? And you have a conversation with your team members on that question. Listen to what people have to say, tease examples out, get people talking about these things, and come up with some suggestions. Now, the other great advantage of having your team involved, apart from the fact that it's fresh in their mind, and apart from the fact that you're getting everybody's voice in the room, the third advantage of this is that the changes that are suggested and made are more likely to be implemented. Why? Well, it's simple. Everybody feels that because they put things on the table, they genuinely don't want to argue with their own data. They're actually happy with what they presented and so people are likely to take on board these changes. So what are the changes we need to implement? Now, if it's done halfway through a project, then obviously you can have incremental change. You can change things or readjust things for the rest of the project. But of course, if it's a debrief right at the end, a formal debrief, a summative debrief, you can also look at implementing those changes before you move on to the next project. So basically, you've got a couple of opportunities there to do that. And I cannot recommend this approach more highly. We're probably talking about 15 minutes as a debrief. And with these three questions, you are definitely in a position to be able to identify those areas that can be improved in your team, which of course is one of the 8 characteristics of high-performing teams, that is improving systems. Now, what are some good examples of this? Well, have a think about this from your own working environment, because you might be sitting there thinking, well, when could I use this? Well, if you, for example, if you're introducing a new procedure or a new way of doing things, and let's face it, our working environment is always changing. So why, at the end of a process it's been implemented, why wouldn't you get the team around the table? Why wouldn't you talk about what's worked, what hasn't worked, and what can we do differently as a result of that? That's an opportunity when a new system's been implemented. Another opportunity is after an extremely busy period when capacity has been stretched to a point where people are flying by the seat of their pants. You get your team around the table and you talk to them at the end of that busy period about what worked well, what didn't work well, and what can we do that might make a difference as a result of that. Another opportunity could be a trial period for a new system or procedure. So you've implemented something, you're not sure whether it's a permanent implementation, but you want to actually get some feedback from your team members. So you ultimately will ask the questions, those 3 questions at the end of a trial period. And those questions will guide and inform whether or not you keep the new system or you improve it, or whatever you might do. You've got your opportunity to do that. So that's a perfect opportunity. A fourth opportunity is that you've done a major training activity. So maybe, for example, you've attended a training program for 2 days and you've got your team there with you. So why wouldn't you just sit there and ask them what worked well in the training, what didn't work well, and what can we take away from that training that might be able to be implemented in our team? So that's a good opportunity as well. And I think for those of you who work in a shift environment where the transition between one shift and another, the perfect opportunity is to have a stand-up meeting, and while the new shift has arrived and the old shift is about to leave, you can ask 3 key questions. What's worked well during your shift? What hasn't worked well during your shift? And what are some of the suggestions and improvements we can make for the next shift? So there's 5 good opportunities to implement an after-action review. And there are 5 opportunities there to do that in such a way as you can improve your systems and processes. So that works extremely well in those cases. Now, let me give you a couple of practical examples that might be useful so you can see how it works. I have a long association with the police, not that sort of association. I do a lot of work for police organizations, and I can recall talking to a female detective who basically worked in the homicide squad, and she tells me that after she's attended a murder investigation with her team, before she lets everybody go home at night, they're probably all tired, it's 1 o'clock in the morning, she basically asks her team out on the pavement 3 key questions. What went well in this investigation? What didn't go well in this investigation? And what can we do differently in the next investigation? Now, she does that before everybody leaves because everyone's obviously looking forward to going home. Now, you might say, well, why doesn't she do that on Monday if that was a Friday night? And the reason is very simple. At that time, straight after the investigation, it's fresh in people's minds. And because it's fresh in people's minds, people can obviously have some insight into those 3 questions. So that works extremely well for this detective. Another example is an IT startup firm I'm working in at the moment. Now, because this is an IT startup firm, there's very few systems, processes, and procedures that are actually in place. So it's more about what should we implement rather than what we can improve. And this team in the IT startup firm, basically after they've done a project or a piece of work for a client, will actually sit around and ask these 3 questions: what went well, what didn't go well, and what will we do differently next time? And so incrementally, they're building up their systems and processes so that next time they have a similar project, it's easy for them to apply what they've learned from the previous project, and it works extremely well. So there's another opportunity. A third example is an example in local government. One organisation I did some work with in local government implemented a major community initiative. So in this initiative, there was considerable capital works involved. And what the organisation did, that is the council, who basically coordinated this activity, is they got a number of stakeholders in the room. They got community members, they got some of the service providers, they had counsellors in the room, and ultimately they ran an after-action review in a more formal setting to try to glean from the participants in this capital works project what worked well, what didn't work well, and what can we do differently. And as a result of that exercise, the council was able to implement a number of different changes in the way they went about their project work in the community, because they were getting direct feedback basically from a number of key stakeholders who were involved in the project. So you can see that there are a lot of opportunities to implement this across a number of different industry groups as well. So if it's good enough for, these three examples and people doing it this way, it's probably good enough for you and me to actually say we could run an after-action review at different points during the project. And bear in mind, I've given you 4 possibilities of when that can work. And those 4 possibilities, which are really debriefing opportunities, you can run that and it'll take you about 15 minutes. And what comes out of it will pleasantly surprise you, because you're getting your team involved in improving systems in your team. And that can't be a bad thing. Some of your team members might think, for example, that it's your job to come up with improvements in your systems, processes, and procedures. But my argument is that everybody in the team have a vested interest in making sure that your systems are working well. And so therefore, if that's the case, then getting them around the table to talk about those things, I think, is critically important. So folks, that's it for today. And I just wanted to let you know that every Friday, if you're not aware, every Friday at this time, I have a 30-minute session from something practical from one of my books, and I share it with you. So I'm conscious of the fact that we're all busy people, and the idea is just 30 minutes of something practical, something useful that you can use in your own organization. So obviously today's session came from my book, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. Now, next week, that's next Friday, you are most welcome to join me and to talk about facilitating a team briefing for impactful learning. And that, as you can see, the date will be a week away on the 16th from 10 to 10:30 a.m. I never go over time. Sometimes I'm under time if necessary, but of course it's a small bite-sized piece of valuable information for you to improve your own leadership capacity. You can see at the bottom there's a link, and as you did today when you registered, you could just click on that link. It'll take you into the registration, and then you will be registered for next week. You'll receive a copy of the slides and the recording from me for today as well, for being, for being here, and I appreciate that. And of course, in that information that I send you will also be a link. So by all means, click on the link, join me next week. And finally, last thing before we finish up, I have a special offer for you, as I mentioned at the outset. If you're interested in getting a copy of my book, Winning Teams, you can do so. I mean, if you go to Amazon, you'll pay $28 plus postage. But if you decide to send me an email by the close of business today, I will send you a copy of the book for $15 plus postage. So that basically half price. I'll sign the book for you and you'll have a copy of that. And it'll obviously have information in the book about the after action review, but there is also 64 different activities and different things that you can do to build a high performing team. And of course, that's in everybody's interest to do that. So folks, that's it from me. We're about done. So I'll just close off at this stage. Thank you for being here today. I hope you found that useful, and I hope that we can join each other again next week, next Friday, when we look at debriefing. And I just wish you a happy weekend. I hope you have a great weekend. Look forward to catching up with you next Friday. All the best, everyone. Thank you and goodbye.